Welcome to our podcast. This is episode number 2. I am Bertrand Leliette, owner of Bertrand's Wines, importer of Burgundy. And today, we're going to try to understand what a monopole is in Burgundy. And for that, we're going to focus on the village of Volnay. Volnay counts 11 monopoles, and so we're going to deep dive into this right now. Picture a vineyard wall. Not a fence, not a hedge, a real stone wall, chest high, built by hand centuries ago, enclosing a few acres of vines on a hillside in Burgundy. Inside the wall, one family has owned every single row of vines for generations. Outside the wall, the same slope, the same soil, the same grape, but split between a dozen, sometimes 50 different growers, each bottling their own version under the same name. That's the difference between an ordinary Burgundy vineyard and what the French call a monopole. And today, we're going to spend some time in the one village in all of Burgundy that has more of them than anywhere else, Volnay. So what is a monopole? Let's start with the basics, because this word gets thrown around a lot in wine lists, and it's worth being precise about it. In Burgundy, land is classified by climat, a specific name parcel, sometimes just a couple of acres, that's been recognized for centuries as having its own particular character. Most climats, even the famous ones, even Grand Crus like Chambertin or Clos, are subdivided among many different owners. Clos de Vougeot, for example, is about 50 acres, 120 acres, split between roughly 80 different producers. You can walk that vineyard and cross a dozen ownership lines without seeing a single physical boundary. That fragmentation is largely historical. After the French Revolution, church and aristocratic estates were broken up and sold off. Then, Napoleonic inheritance law required that land be divided equally among heirs, generation after generation. Do that for 200 years, and a single vineyard ends up sliced into slivers. Some growers own rows just a few vines wide. A monopole is the exception to all of that. A climat where, through accident of history, negotiation, or simple luck, one single estate has ended up owning and controlling the entire parcel. One name on the label, one hand in the vineyard, one winemaking decision tree from pruning to bottling. That singularity is what makes monopoles collectible. When you buy a monopole, you're not buying a version of that vineyard among several competing interpretations. You're buying the version. There is no other. Why Volnay? Now, monopoles exist all over Burgundy. La Romanée in Von Romanée, Clos de Lambray in Moray Saint-Denis, which is actually not a monopole, but perceived as one. Château Grillé down in the Rhône Valley for non-Burgundy example, but they're rare. Most villages have 0, or maybe 1. Volnay has 11. 10 of them fully walled, true Clos, enclosed behind stone, and one more that's a monopole in every legal and practical sense, without ever having had a wall built around it. All Premier Cru, all planted to Pinot Noir, all clustered in and around a single village that's already one of the most prized addresses in the Côte de Beaune for elegant, structured red wine. According to the estate historians and the University of Burgundy, researchers who've been digging into this, literally and figuratively, nobody has found another village in Burgundy that comes close to that concentration. Some of these clos were carved out by the Ducs of Burgundy themselves in the Middle Ages, defending the village against invasion. Others took shape more recently, in the 1930s, right around the time France was formalizing its appellation d'origine contrôlée system. A couple of them changed hands, changed names, even changed shape over the centuries. 3 of them, of the 10 walled clos, 3 are owned by a single estate. And one monopole on this list doesn't have a wall at all, which is exactly why it's worth understanding what actually defines a monopole once we get to it. Let's walk the wall and then stop outside it. 11 parcels, 11 stories. So what are the 11 monopoles of Volnay? Number 1, Clos de la Bousse d'Or. The owner is Domaine de la Pousse d'Or. At the historic heart of the village, just below the ruins of the old ducal château, sits Clos de la Bousse d'Or, 2.1 hectares on a gentle southeast-facing slope. Its name evolved over several centuries from Bousse d'Or, Boussetort, in the 1200s, to Bousse tourte, a nod to the twisted shape of the plot, and finally, by 1661, to Bousse d'Or, the Bousse of gold. Once the vineyard's wine had been valuable enough to be compared to precious metal. Past owners include the Ducs of Burgundy themselves, and a 19th century proprietor who also happened to own part of La Romanée-Conti. Today it belongs to Patrick Landanger, a businessman from the medical sector who acquired the domain in 1997 and is now run by his son after Patrick passed away a few years ago. Warm, sheltered, solar, in local parlance, the wine is built on richness and flesh. Our number 2 monopole is the Clos des 60 Ouvrées, Clos of 60 Ouvrées. It is also owned by the Domaine de la Pousse d'Or. This is their second monopole. It sits on the opposite edge of the village, bordering Meursault, within the larger Cailleret climat. Same, warm, southerly exposure as the Bousse d'Or, but a deeper red stony topsoil that gives the wine more finesse and floral lift rather than sheer weight. Its written history has essentially vanished, no record in the old vineyard registers, which only adds to the mystique. Our number 3 monopole is the Clos d'Audignac, also owned by Domaine de la Pousse d'Or. It is their smallest monopole, just over 1 hectare. It sits directly beneath the estate's own house, on a steeper, cooler, northeast-facing slope. On paper, that is the cold exposure. In practice, the imposing stone building above it radiates enough heat to warm the plot. It's named after François d'Audignac, an 18th century official who inherited the property and is thought to have planted the clos himself. Of the 3, this is typically the most reserved and structured in youth. Clos de la Chapelle. The owner is Domaine du Clos de la Chapelle, an American owner that recently sold his estate to a young winemaker that is receiving a lot of praise right now in Burgundy. It used to be owned by the Boyau family for nearly 150 years before passing in 2001 to Mark O'Connell, and to passing recently into the hands of a young winemaker in Savigny-les-Beaunes. Burgundian winemaker Pierre Murger was making the wines until now. The Clos takes its name from the small chapel across the road and sits on a warm, gently sloping band of land facing the plain. The domain is farming organically, moving towards biodynamics, and preserving old vines for future Massal selection, repenting from their own best vine material rather than nursery clones. Clos de Verseuil is our number 5 monopole. The owner is Domaine Yvon Clerget. In the Clerget family since 1935. This is the vineyard traditionally picked first each vintage by the estate. Despite sitting in a spot that should, on paper, be cooler and windier than its neighbors, the name likely derives from the Latin versus, meaning slope. Young winemaker Thibaut Clerget, who took over from his father in 2015, dug into the soil in 2020 and found a deep, well-drained layer of limestone, scree over clay, explaining the vineyard's precocity despite its exposure. Monopole number 6. Le Clos du Château des Ducs. The owner is one of many's favorites, Domaine Lafarge. This small rectangular clos sits on the exact footprint of the medieval Château de Volnay, built by the Ducs of Burgundy in the 11th century and largely demolished in 1778. Though the domain still ages wine in a 13th century cellar beneath, it was built by Frédéric Guillot, great-grandfather of current winemaker Frédéric Lafarge and his son and daughter. In 1900, the Clos is farmed biodynamically and is typically the earliest picked parcel in the entire Lafarge portfolio, sometimes 2 to 3 days ahead of the estate's other Premier Cru. Monopole number 7. Clos de la Cave des Ducs. The owners are the Carré-Dureuil family and the Carré family. The wines are vinified and sold by Benjamin Leroux. So this is tucked into the maze of village streets. Above the rooftops, this clos sits on part of the old ducal chateau's dependencies and cellars. Since the family's own domain ceased activity in 2006, the vineyard has been farmed on lease by the Dureuil brothers on the entire crop, and it's vinified by négociant winemaker Benjamin Leroux, who has been the custodian of the fruit since 2007. A natural spring runs through the clos, giving it real resiliency in hot, dry vintages. Monopole number 8. The Clos des Ducs. The owner is the Marquis d'Angerville. Arguably the most internationally recognized of the 10, and in the family since 1804. This is polished in the north side of the village, positioned in the north side of the village on a steep, well-drained slope of white marl, rich in active limestone. It's traditionally the last parcel picked by the estate each year. A generally late ripening site, despite Volnay's generally warm reputation. In 1507, royal inventory already records a vineyard exactly this size on this spot, tying its origins directly back to the ducal era. Certified organic since 2006 and biodynamic since 2009, it is run today by Guillaume d'Angerville. Monopole number 9, the Clos de la Rougeotte. The owner of this clos is the Domaine François Buffet. Surrounded on all 4 sides by other named Premier Cru, Frémier, Clos de la Rougeotte, Le Village, l'Épiture dessus, Les Angles, and always the first parcel harvested at the Domaine. The name likely refers to the same reddish, iron-rich seam of earth found in Pommard-les-Rugiens. The Buffet family only began claiming the vineyard by name in their own declaration in 1977. Today it's run by Marc-Olivier Buffet, whose organic certification process began in December 2020. It's been certified since 2025. Number 10, Clos de la Barre. This is owned by a family called the Coupé family, but this is farmed and sold under lease by the Maison Louis Jadot. The odd one out of the list, in a good way. The sole owner, Mr. Coupé, doesn't make the wine himself. Since the early 2000s, he has leased the Clos to the négociant house Louis Jadot, whose technical director, Frédéric Barnier, now farms and vinifies it. Named for the barrier and security chains that one guarded the approach to the ducal château, the Clos sits along the old Beaune-Autun road on stony, heat-retaining topsoil over fissured limestone bedrock, and is consistently harvested very early at low yields of 30 to 40 hectoliters per hectare. Les Grands Champs. This is our monopole number 11, and one of our friend Pierrick Boulet, obviously. And this is a monopole without a wall. So Pierrick Boulet is the owner, and this is number 11 monopole in the village of Volnay, and the exception that proves the rule. Les Grands Champs is a large climat, classified mostly at village level, except for one long, narrow band, more than 100 meters north to south, about 24 acres, that carries full Premier Cru status, sitting just below another Premier Cru, en Lormeau. There is no stone wall around it. There never has been, and yet it belongs in its entirety to a single producer, the Boulle family, who have farmed, vinified, and bottled it as a standalone monopole since the 2010 vintage. Before that, the fruit was simply sold off in bulk to a négociant house and vanished into someone else's blend, uncredited. This is exactly why it's worth including Les Grands Champs alongside the 10-walled Clos rather than treating it as a footnote. A monopole isn't legally defined by masonry. It's defined by exclusive ownership of every vine within a named climat's boundaries. Les Grands Champs meets that test as squarely as Clos des Ducs does. It simply happens to be fenced by property lines and farming history rather than by its stone. According to the Boulle estate, the terroir here is almost flat, with small limestone, scree mixed into fine clay, quite different underfoot from the steeper, walled Clos closer to the village center, which only reinforces the point. What makes it a monopole has nothing to do with what it looks like from the road, and everything to do So how rare is this really? Let's put some scale on this. Across the whole of Burgundy, Chablis down to the Mâconnais. Hundreds of plots, thousands of individual climats. True monopoles number only in the dozens. Most villages include some of the grandest names on earth have none at all. Volnay, a single village of roughly 220 hectares, about 500 acres, has 11. 10 fully enclosed Clos and 1 unwalled Premier Cru strip, all held outright by a single owner each. And within those 11, one estate, Domaine de la Pousse d'Or, controls 3 outright. That's not a coincidence of modern consolidation either. It's the layered result of medieval ducal land grants, Renaissance property splits, 19th century speculation, and in at least one case, a straightforward American investment in 2011. Researchers at the University of Burgundy are still trying to fully map how and when each of these walls went up. A comprehensive study with its own reference book and public database is expected around 2022. Worth underlining again, that count of 11 only holds if you accept Les Grands Champs as a monopole in the first place, wall or no wall. Some old guard Burgundy references stick strictly to the word Clos and would tell you Volnay has 10. We would argue that's a distinction of masonry, not of ownership, and ownership is the only thing that actually defines the category. Why Volnay specifically? Partly geography, a naturally walled terrace hillside right up against the village itself, easy to enclose. Partly history, the ducal château sat right there and its presence organized a lot of the surrounding land into discrete, defensible blocks early on. And partly just fortune. Nobody planned for Volnay to become the monopole capital of Burgundy. It just happened, wall by wall, over 800 years. So what does this mean if you're a buyer, collector, sommelier? So why should any of this matter to you if you're the one holding the bottle or the one recommending it across a restaurant table? Point number 1, total transparency of authorship. When you buy a village blend cuvée or even a Premier Cru assembled from a purchased grape across several growers, you're tasting an average, a compromise, however well judged. With a monopole, every decision in that bottle, the pruning, the picking date, the whole cluster percentage, the barrel regime, belongs to one person, one philosophy, start to finish. There's nowhere to hide, and nothing diluting the signal. If you like a Domaine's hand, the monopole is that hand at its purest. Point number 2, genuine. verifiable rarity. A monopole, by definition, can never be split further among competing bottling under the same vineyard name. The production is fixed by the size of the walled plot or non-walled plot and nothing else. No expansion, no new growers entering the market with their version of Clos des Ducs. That scarcity is real, not marketing. Point number 3. It removes one axis of comparison, but adds another. With most Burgundy Premier Cru, you can taste 5 or 6 versions of the same vineyard side by side and start to separate the vineyard's voice from the grower's voice. With a monopole, you can't do that split anymore. You only ever hear one voice. That's a trade-off. It means your trust has to sit entirely with the producer. Buy a great monopole from a mediocre or inconstant hand, and there's no other bottling of that same dirt to fall back on as a benchmark. This is exactly why sommeliers tend to treat monopoles as a bet on the house as much as a bet on the terroir, and why track record, vintage after vintage, matters even more here than elsewhere in Burgundy. Point number 4. Provenance and collectibility. For collectors, a monopole offers something close to a closed, traceable lineage. One estate, often one family, sometimes for centuries. That kind of unbroken custodianship is exactly the story that drives long-term seller value and auction interest. That's also, frankly, a great story to tell at the table. This wine has been made behind the same stone wall by the same family since 1804. That lands very differently than, well, this is a blend of Premier Cru fruit. Point number 5. The price reflects all of the above and then some. Scarcity, story, and single-hand quality control all get priced in. Monopoles in Volnay and somewhere else routinely command a premium over neighboring non-monopole Premier Cru of comparable reputation, sometimes a significant one. That premium isn't irrational. You genuinely are buying something structurally different. But it does mean the buyer needs to do their homework on the producer, not just the vineyard name on the label before paying it. Ten walls, open field, 11 stories, one very small village on the Côte de Beaune that quietly became the monopole capital of Burgundy, almost by accident over 8 centuries. Next time you see Clos des Ducs, Clos de la Pousse d'Or, Clos de Versailles, or even our friend Pierric's Les Grands Champs on a wine list, you know you're not looking at one interpretation among many. You're looking at the only interpretation there will ever be, for better, and, if the winemaker has a bad vintage, for worse too. This is the whole podcast for today. Go pull the cork on something that either has a wall or not around it, and test the difference for yourself. I hope you learned something today. I hope you're going to keep your enthusiasm for Burgundy, and I'll be talking to you very soon.